Well, we begin this news hour with missile attacks in Syria and Iraq, which the US is calling reckless. Washington has condemned Iran over the strikes. The Revolutionary Guard say they launched ballistic missiles that hit Israeli spy headquarters in northern Iraq. Missiles and drone attacks also targeted Erbil near the airport. At least 4 people were killed, 6 wounded. The Prime Minister of the semi-autonomous Kurdish region says the attack is cowardly. Tehran also targeted ISIL in Syria in retaliation for bombings in Iran earlier this month. Well, let's speak to Mahmoud Abdelwahed. He joins us now from Baghdad. Mahmoud, I understand that the local authorities are saying that these were civilian areas that were hit?
Well, that's what the regional government in Iraq's semi-autonomous Kurdish region says, that it's an act of aggression and a violation of Iraq's sovereignty. Those missile attacks that targeted, as it says, civilian areas, leaving civilian casualties, deaths and injuries. But on the other hand, as you know, that Iran's Revolutionary Guard stated that it is targeted spy headquarters and gatherings of what it calls anti-Iran terrorist groups in Erbil, the capital city of Iraq's northern semi-autonomous Kurdish region. Now, the regional government in Erbil is calling on the federal government in Baghdad to take strict measures against those violations of its sovereignty. In fact, it calls on the international community also to take strict measures against those violations. We understand that Iran's proxy forces in Iraq have been carrying out similar attacks since mid-October, targeting US and coalition forces, troops and military facilities in Iraq and Syria. But this is a new development that the Revolutionary Guard is taking matters into their own hands and using ballistic missiles.
Mahmoud Abdelwahed there with the latest for us from the Iraqi capital. Thank you, Mahmoud. Well, let's now bring in Dorsa Jabbari. She joins me here in the studio. Dorsa, you've spent an enormous amount of time for us in Tehran. Talk us through what Iran's thinking right now. What's the calculus for them at the moment?
Well, they needed to respond. They've been talking a big game since October 7th. And given the recent developments on the ground inside Iran, the attacks that were carried out in Kerman and the number of Revolutionary Guard commanders that were assassinated in Syria, and what Israel has said about Iran being behind Hamas, fully supporting them, and then the Houthis. So there's a number of different factors that came into play to carry out these strikes. Now, the most important point is that these are multiple ballistic missiles that were launched from Iran itself. Iran didn't use any of its proxies to carry out these attacks.
Direct attacks, we're talking about.
And they used their long-range missiles, and they hit targets in Syria, in Idlib province. So it's quite a far distance for these missiles to go. There's a few things Iran is trying to achieve with this. First is to target specific people that they wanted to get. They claim that it was Mossad training grounds or facilities in Erbil, and then in Syria, spots belonging to ISIL. The other thing is to deliver a message to the United States and Israel, mainly that to reiterate Iran's military might. It's well known in the Middle East. Iran has the biggest missile arsenal in the region. And using these ballistic missile long range, it's certainly going to deliver that message and a reminder to the U.S. and Israel that Iran has the capabilities. And the third is also to quiet some of the internal criticism Iran has been facing over the past few months for not doing enough, for not responding strongly enough to what's been happening in the region in terms of how the United States and Israel have been moving forward and carrying out various assassinations and attacks in regional countries, and blaming Iran for what is at the root cause of the issues.
Really interesting dynamics. Dorsa Jabbari, thank you for joining us this news hour. Well, let's now bring in Mohammad Marandi. He's a political analyst and also a professor at the University of Tehran. He joins me now from the Iranian capital. Professor, this appears to have been a very targeted operation, seemingly a calibrated response. How concerned are you about regional escalation? I mean, those fears have been very, very real for many watchers since October the 7th.
Everyone is concerned about escalation, except for apparently the Israeli regime and its American allies. Almost from day one, the Iranians, along with many others across the region, have been calling for a ceasefire, and the Americans have been refusing to support a ceasefire. And so have most EU countries alongside the Americans. And as the fighting went on and as the genocide in Gaza grew worse, the fighting began to spread. Hezbollah in the north, they have been fighting literally from day one. They've given 150 or so martyrs because they have been trying to draw away the Israeli military from Gaza. And more recently, Ansarullah has been putting pressure on ships going to Israeli ports to build more pressure to end this Holocaust. And of course, the resistance in Iraq has also been active to put pressure on the Americans to end this. But so far, we haven't seen de-escalation. We're only seeing escalation. I think the strikes that the Iranians have carried out are both to target Mossad offices and terrorist organizations, but also to send a message to the Israelis and the Americans that this escalation will hurt them more than anyone else.
Well, let me ask you more about this, because some of these strikes, they took place in an area around the U.S. consulate, as I understand, but it was not hit, the building itself. So what is Tehran's message to Washington right now? Is this just about a show of military might, or does it go beyond that?
Many of the offices of terrorist organizations and the Mossad are very close to the U.S. consulate because that they feel protected. But the Iranians were striking these targets because unfortunately northern Iraq is heavily infiltrated. They were both striking these targets, but also they were telling the Americans, they were sending a message that our missiles are very precise and we're not afraid to target these offices, these bases near your buildings. Again, I think it's both to strike at these terror groups and those linked to the Mossad, but also telling the Americans that Iran has tremendous power and that if we want stability in this region, if we want the oil markets to be stable, if we want the economy across the globe to grow, this ceasefire has to be put in place.
Well, as we were just hearing from Dorsa, this was Iran's Revolutionary Guard themselves, not an Iranian proxy as we've seen before. Should we read anything into that?
Well, I don't believe Iran has any proxies. These are all Iranian allies, whether in Yemen, Lebanon, Iraq. In Iraq, the Iraqi armed forces alongside the Iranians fought on the ground to defeat ISIS, the same ISIS group that was created thanks to Western and NATO intelligence agencies. But so they're not proxies, they have agency. All these groups, this resistance front from Lebanon to Yemen to Gaza itself and Iraq, Iran, everyone is piling on pressure gradually to force the Americans to end this Holocaust. We wake up every morning to see dead bodies on our cell phones, on the television screen. This has to end. And if it does not end, when war continues, things will happen, and it will automatically push the region towards greater escalation.
Mohammad Marandi, there, a professor at the University of Tehran. Always great to have you. Thanks for sharing your thoughts there. Well, Iraq is now saying it will take legal measures against the actions which it describes as an aggression. In a statement, the Foreign Ministry has said it considered the attacks a violation of Iraq's sovereignty and the security of its people.